share it with you all and anybody else who may have signed up but wasn't able to attend. Thank you for joining today. You are here to join us to learn about what to do before data visualization and how to get your data in place. A couple of house announcements or a couple of items I want to cover. One, obviously, thank you for being here during this difficult time for all of us. We really appreciate it. We would have been in Baltimore right now today, all congregating together. So we appreciate continuing to build out this community and you being here. And we understand that times are tough for everyone. Also wanted to share that our co-presenter, who is Mao Shimi from Planned Parenthood of New York, she is dealing with a lot of actual on-the-ground issues in terms of ensuring that the organization is prepared to do the first responder work. And so she's not able to join. She sends her regrets, but they are all hands on deck, really busy. She's right in the city where we have the largest outbreak. So I just wanted to share that. She did want to be here, but we feel confident that we can share really good information with you guys, and we'll get right into it. So let me share who the presenter is, and the Jay is the presenter for this show, or the co-presenter, again, the single person today. Jay is the co-founder of Bowery Analytics, where he designs large-scale human capital management and marketing projects for large organizations such as L'Oreal, Whirlpool, and many nonprofits such as Open Society Foundation, ACS, New York State, and Health Foundation. He has helped design master's program in HCM at NYU and currently teaches HR analytics and visual storytelling at NYU. Jay, please say hello to everyone and let's get started.
Thanks, Tanya. Welcome, everybody. So let's get started. We have a bunch of things to cover today. So two things we want to talk about today is one is the data management process. That's prior to visualization, right? What goes into it, what does, how do you get your data in order? We will start at the very basic in terms of what is data, what are the different kinds of data, the velocity and volume of data and things of that nature. And then we move into the visualization process itself. That the post data, now you have your data in place. What are the things you need to do before you actually use a tool like Tableau and Power BI, right? And we will stop right before that. We'll stop short of actually using this visualization tool. And again, feel free to stop me anytime during this presentation and ask questions, etc. As much as it is interactive, it adds a lot of value. And that's pretty much it in terms of agenda. And before we get started, can we do a quick poll on where everybody stands, as well as
yeah, so I just launched a first poll. We would like to find out is, what is your role in the organization that you play today? We'd like to know sort of a little bit about your background. This will help us figure out how to tailor that. And if you chose other, please feel free to use the chat to just type in maybe what your title is. That will be helpful to us just to better understand how to think about the delivery. So we definitely have some folks who are in the IT function. We have some folks who are programmatic function. We have some business owners and experts. And I'm seeing some chat folks that are in marketing, data strategy, community hub manager, director of CRM database, a graphic designer, communications and marketing, public policy, and pro bono technology advisor. Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. So we do have folks, seems like overall within the data community at some point somewhere. Almost all of our jobs touched that, but sounds great. Okay, Jay, so those are your answers. Think about how you can incorporate all of that.
I think the content might very well resonate with what we have here in terms of the attendees, right? So let's get started. Let's dive right in. So let's get started with again, two things we want to talk about: the data management process and the data visualization process, right? And in the data management process, we're going to talk about the 5 key points, the 5 V's of data, which is the volume of data that we need to deal with before we start visualization, the velocity, the variety, the veracity, and the value that comes out of data, right? And we're going to drill into each one of these and walk through the kind of questions we might want to ask before we start the visualization process, right? So let's start with the data itself, right? There are a lot of data folks here, right? Can somebody chime in and give some feedback on what data is?
You can chat that in if you like. Everybody is technically on mute because we're in webinar form.
Okay, over a dozen different systems, right? Okay, so data is generally right. Any kind of information that is in the raw format, right? You can think of it as a single unit of observation, right? And this single point of observation can have multiple variables. If you're looking at an individual, it could have height, gender, age, right? So that's like 3 different data points that makes that unit of observation. That could be considered as data, right? And if you look at all the population, that's with thinking about several members and several members as well as, right, if you're looking at statistics as a whole of all the population and in that particular geo, that becomes a data set, right? So let's look at an example. In this scenario, this is what I pulled up from the NYC Open Data Set. It's actually a good resource if you want to just play around with data, right? This is what we call a data set, right? In the simplest form, it has multiple data points and multiple units of observation, right? A single job here is actually a unit of observation. And each individual columns here is a data point, right? It's a data point in terms of variable. A lot of times you see this language and when you start using tools like Tableau and Power BI, and all these data points together makes a unit of observation, and all the unit of observation together makes a data set. Okay. There is primarily 2 types of data. One is the quantitative data and one is the qualitative data, right? The number of positions, anything that can be measured, that can be summed, that can be averaged, that can be counted, that become quantitative. Okay. In terms of qualitative data, that's something that you can't purely do math on it, but you could do some kind of analysis on top of it. Okay. So in this scenario, the posting type, internal or external, right? You can't just add internal and to external, but those 2 values together, right? Those, if you look at that column, is a textual field. It's not really purely a numerical number. That becomes qualitative data, right? And this becomes very important, especially when you started doing visualization. You want to understand. This comes through as we talk more through it in the visualization process. This helps you understand what kind of data are you dealing with, right? Are you dealing with quantitative information or are you dealing with qualitative information? The kind of charts you choose, whether you're choosing a pivot or you're choosing a bar chart or using a histogram or using a tree map, this kind of information kind of matters in terms of understanding if it's a qualitative or quantitative. If it's a qualitative data, you might want to use a pie chart, right? If it is quantitative data, you want to use a bar chart. So these kind of things matter, right? And in quantitative, there could be 2 different types of data. One is discrete and one is continuous. Again, the reason being, discrete data is pieces of information which is almost fixed, right? In the sense that somebody's age, it could fall in a different bucket, 1 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, right? You have a set definition of what that piece of information belongs to, right? A certain category in which that information belongs to. Continuous information is actually time series, how the stock market performance, I mean, today's environment, how the coronavirus is impacting on a day-to-day basis, right? It's a continuous stream of information. And how does it affect visualization? Because in continuous is mostly is a time series and it goes through a period of time, and discrete is mostly a bar chart or a pie chart or a tree map, right? It's like a certain piece of information, and you can categorize this into a bucket, say like how many individuals in 2030 between 20 and 30 is getting affected, how many folks in between 30 and 40 is getting affected, right? You can create these discrete windows and put people in. Okay, that's the difference. So again, the reason why I bring this up is this knowledge, when you go through the data exploration phase, before you start your visuals and before you understand what kind of visuals to choose, this information about data is going to help you tremendously. Yeah. And the qualitative data we've seen is ordinal. It belongs to a certain value groups. It could be high, low, medium in terms of it in terms of somebody's revenue, or it could be the priority that you wanted to focus on, or in the early data set we see right here. Posting type, this is an ordinal, right? Internal action, two possible values. Title classification, this could be looked at as an ordinal value, right? There is a set definition, a predefined value or a predefined classification in which that group can belong to. So that becomes a qualitative piece of information. Again, this goes very much into the data exploration phase and the data gathering phase, and this helps you understand or visualize, or as we move forward, we're going to look into the storytelling process itself. This help you understand, okay, how do I use this data, how do I use this data, how do I use this information about my type of data, and what kind of visual can I build on top of it. Again, going back, this example that we just looked at. Okay. And that leads to the analysis process itself. Prior to visualization, we are going to a lot of this exploration first. You want to understand what kind of data are we dealing with. And normally most of you who are in this data space, right, you might be already doing this in terms of opening this up in a spreadsheet, or opening this up in your computer in terms of a text notepad or Word document. You're trying to understand what kind of data you're dealing with, right? Essentially, most of the data that you're dealing with is just basically information, right? A lot of discrete information you heard from different places or you captured from different places, and that is raw information, or also like raw data, right? Translating that raw data into knowledge or insights is the process called data analysis. Okay, and one of the steps in that data analysis is visually explaining, or visual data visualization. That is, you took this information, you combined it, you merged it with different data sets. You took information from one file, you took information another file, you put it together, and you went through the data analysis process. You wanted to understand what kind of data you're dealing with. Is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? If it is quantitative, is it a time series, or if it is a bar chart? You brought it all together and then you visualize it, right? That's when wisdom is generated, and that whole process is called analysis, data analysis, or data analytics, a bit more technically. So what does this process looks like, right? As you can see, the consume and visualize is the last step in the process. The very beginning, we're going to start with understanding the raw data itself. And lot of the times, the challenge is, especially when you're just getting started with the visualization process, is skipping the first 5 steps and directly loading a data set into Tableau or Power BI, in any of your favorite visualization tools. Okay, what you really want to do is understand your data, right? Where is your data coming from? That is, where is your raw data coming from, and what kind of data are you dealing with, right? And then you wanted to move into ingestion and the collection process. How are you collecting this data? Okay, if you want to create a repeatable process, you want to understand, is it coming via an email? Is it coming via a web form? Somebody emailing a spreadsheet to you, or is it sitting in your enterprise database, right? Somebody was telling me that in the chat, they're managing the CRM database. Is it stored in the CRM database, or part of the data is in CRM database and part of the data is in a spreadsheet or some CSV file? or part of the data you need to do some web scraping to pick up, right? Understand that data. Where is the data coming from, right? That is the collection process and the ingestion process before you start visualizing it. And the next step of it is the storing the data. Where is this stored? Again, some organizations, if you're a small organization, it might live in a spreadsheet. They might not have too many records, 50,000 records, 100,000 records, which is not too much in the bigger scheme of things. But you might want to understand where this data is stored, right? Because you wanted to build your visual, which points this to this particular spreadsheet, and this spreadsheet get updated every 24 hours. So your visual get updated every 24 hours, or when somebody clicks on it, right? And the fourth step here is the processing the data. We're going to get a bit more into how we're going to process the data. That's a critical piece before we start analyzing it. Again, in the processing stage, we are just making sure the date format is correct. We do the email format is correct. Do we have the right terminology for true or false? Some data sets have true or false. Some have yes or no. Some have one or zero. How do we bring it all together into a common format? Otherwise your visuals will be skewed, right? And that lead to analyzing. When you get into the analyzing phase, you're at that point, you're very close to getting started with visualization, right? In the analyzing phase, what you're really doing here is you're just getting a general, broader understanding of data, right? You have the data is clean now, you ingested it, you collected it, you stored it, you do a lot of processing, you make sure all the dates are correct, you make sure all the Boolean values are correct, yes or no, and true or false, and one and zero, all of them are in the right place. And instead of New York, it is NY, instead of Connecticut, it's CT, all of that is correct. Now you're getting the analyzing phase, right? Here you're trying to understand how many records are there, right? How many records are there without email address? How many records are without a state column? How many have incorrect data, right? So you're doing a lot of those kind of analysis. If you're doing Excel, you're pivoting your data tables, or you're pivoting your spreadsheet, things of that nature. And finally, you are in a place, okay, your data is clean, you feel confident. Let's load this data into Tableau or Power BI, and let's start visualizing this. Okay.
So Jay, I'll just pause right here for just a second. Let's ask folks a follow-up question through the poll as well. And I'll launch that right now. But we wanted to know, do any of you currently use any data visualization tools? So I just launched. Let us know if you're currently using some tools. Okay. We're getting quite a lot of yeses, which is great. So you have some experience with this already and are well into this. Excellent. Thank you for that response. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, Janet says we get the data in a spreadsheet, sometimes create graphs, tables there, then use graphic designer to visualize. That's a good approach as well, right? So again, so in your process, the raw data is captured in a spreadsheet, the ingestion collection is a spreadsheet, storing is a spreadsheet, the processing also is done in a spreadsheet, and analyzing also done in a spreadsheet. That is very common, okay? Even very large organization, we see a lot of pivots, a lot of sales data is captured directly in a spreadsheet. Spreadsheet is a great tool, right? Your visuals are only as good as your data, right? So again, a lot of pivots that you do helps you understand that your data is correct. And a lot of the time, the people who are working more than the technical person who is looking at it, the subject matter expert who is looking at the data, they can immediately pick up nuance and say, this doesn't look correct, right? So there's a lot of intuition that goes behind the processing and analyzing phase, okay? The raw data, we just talked about it, right? The raw data can be three different types of raw data. The structured, which is normally comes in a spreadsheet or nice little table, what we just looked at. Semi-structured, which is like a comma separated file, or it could be a XML, right? One of those very technical type of files. It is not easy for a non-technical person to look at, right? If it's structured, is in a tabular format and it's easy to look at. Unstructured is where majority of the challenge lives. The reason being, all the images, all the videos, right? All the emails that you send to each other, all of them are unstructured data, okay? 80% of the data that is created is unstructured data. And now there are a lot of new technology with natural language and, there are some tools available, but it's not matured enough. But if you're in a corporate environment, or if you're in a non-profit environment, if you're in any kind of business environment, majority of the time when we talk about visualizing data, you're working in a structured or a semi-structured environment, okay? Unstructured, Google is doing, counting how many cats are there in a video and things of that nature. Things are there to a large degree in that realm, but very few companies have actually reached a point where, okay, let's commercialize this, let's put this to use, okay? IBM tried it without a lot of success, but we're slowly getting there. Ingestion and collection, we just talked about it. How are you getting your data, right? Via web form, third-party system, somebody typing it in. It could be any of these. Storing, again, right? It could be, the whole process could be in a spreadsheet. It could be in a Google Sheet. Now we see a lot of companies connecting to a Google Sheet. And a lot of these new tools like Tableau and Power BI will allow you to directly connect to a Google Sheet, right? So you can use a Google Sheet as a semi database or a pseudo database with something that refreshed every day. People are going to go there and directly typing in the data there. Okay, and if the data is in a text file, again, you need to have some kind of processing before you get to connect that to a visual tool. And that leads to the last point, right? The processing part of it. What are the dates in the right format? Right? Are all the states and the country codes, all of this correct? If the phone number correct, the international phone numbers normally comes with the country code. Domestic phone numbers normally have 10 digits. Not everybody adds the +1 in front of it. So understand all these nuances in data. This can save you hours of time when you start visualizing it. Okay, the dates, Europe has a different date format. They use a date before month. US uses month before date. Things of the nature can set that kind of processing, that kind of transformation from one to another. Before you get into visualization, understand what date format you want to. Date is the most common place where people miss that step to normalize the data into a normal step, into a common format. And the other area that we see is gender, right? In some place it is male, female, some place it is like M or F, or some kind of Boolean value, right? Are you living in New York? Are you not living in New York? Some, if you're a web form, it could be true or false. It could be a checkbox, and some systems capture it as true or false. And if it is coming via spreadsheet, it could be yes or no. Understand that common language, right? Is this something that you want to do? If you're working with third party, explain to them, for these kind of data formats, this is the kind of values that we are expecting. Okay, so in that sense, right, they are sending you the right set of data. Otherwise, you are, if you're building out a bar plot, or if you're building out a histogram, your values can show differently, right? Your counts won't look correct. Again, better processing leads to better visualization. Then analyzing process is one of the last steps before you get into the visualization process. How many records are there, right? How many members are in this file? Do we have data from all states? So again, more insights before you visualize. The, the first 5 steps, the key to these steps is you got to have a deep understanding. It's really exploring the data in the raw format, right? You're interacting with the data before you visualizing. Before you get in the visualization process, you're trying to look at, okay, what am I dealing with really? What are the raw materials looks like, right? And most of the time, there is no magical formula for it. You are pretty much opening this in a spreadsheet or querying a database and like just trying to understand the data. You're trying to interact with the data, right? Once you are completed, once you go through that process and you get comfortable with it, then you are in a good place where, okay, let me go ahead and let me visualize this, right? So I'm going to stop there for a second before we get into the next phase. Any questions so far?
And at any time, please feel free to use the Q&A or chat to ask anything clarifying on any of the slides, or if you need us to slow down on any one specific item. seeing anything. We can definitely come back to the questions if anything
Got
comes up.
it. So that leads to the key challenges with data, right? Might not be applicable to every organization, but the key questions that I would ask before I get into any visualization process, right? This is the 5 V's of data. Let's get right to it. The number one thing is volume, right? Massive amount of data is generated. This is like a this image is a couple of years older, but this is still applicable. 40 zettabytes, or unimaginable amount of data is created. Not every organization is creating images at this level. But the reason I put up this slide is before you start the visualization process, build out a simple metrics, right? Build a simple spreadsheet where ask these questions. How much volume do we have, right? It could be something as small as I only want to visualize 100 records. So be it, right? Or it could be 100,000 records, or it could be 1,000,000 records, right? Your choice of the kind of visualization you want to use, the kind of process you want to build to automate your process changes tremendously, okay, depending on the volume of data. Because some tools like Tableau has limits on how much data that it can handle. Power BI can only handle 10 GB of data in the desktop edition, all right? So there is limitations on what kind of tools and technology goes into place depending on the volume of data, all right? We talked about it a little bit earlier. Structured data is 10%, semi-structured data is 10%. Majority of the data is unstructured data, which is 80% of data, right? And most of these tools, like the common tools that we know in the marketplace, cannot handle this unstructured data. But structured data is where we are normally playing, okay? And the next thing is we want to know is the velocity of data, right? Velocity in the sense that how soon are this data coming to you for you to visualize, right? If you most companies or most banks or most nonprofits, the stream of data is not like Facebook or Twitter, right? It's a non-stop. It's not a non-stop stream. It's not like Wall Street where the traders are sending you streams of information for you to visualize, right? Again, you want to understand this, understand the velocity of data to understand how it is going to impact your visualization. Can your visual tool actually can handle? So you might want to ask this question. Okay, velocity is okay. It's 24 hours. It's 2 times a day. It's 12-hour windows. This is how we're going to get your data, and this is how we're going to build your process. So if you are scheduling your dashboard or you're scheduling your report, you can say refresh it twice a day, and that's how the data is getting updated, right? And that leads to process. If it is a scheduled process, that leads to batch. We're doing it scheduled, we're doing it periodic, we're doing it couple of times a day. And if it is streaming, we're doing it real time, we're doing it non-stop, right? We are streaming the data as the data they come in. Say for example the Twitter feed or the Facebook feed, right? You're processing data as they come in. Not always normal or common, but it's important that you understand the difference between these two kind of processing. Batch is what we commonly deal with. I think we have a Q&A here. Okay.
Yes, I will have the recording available. Thank you. That was the
Fantastic.
question. I think somebody has to jump off.
Okay, fantastic. That leads to the next question, the variety of data. These two pieces, be very wary of it before you start your visualization process. Understand what kind of data we're dealing with here. We talked about it a bit earlier. Is it coming via CSV? It is coming via spreadsheet. Is it stored in a database, right? Is it like somebody just sending an image file and trying to extract some kind of knowledge out of it, right? Understand a variety of information in your metrics that you build out, in your sample spreadsheet that you build out, your Q&A you build out before in your analysis phase. Ask these questions, right? What kind of data am I dealing with? This saves you a lot of surprise. Okay, it helps you level set your expectation in terms of what you're dealing with, right? So so again, be wary of the types of data. Okay, is it database, is CSV, JSON, or is unstructured, right? The structuring the data, we talked about it a few minutes ago. Is it all in the right format? Is it coming in a type that you can process or you can understand? And the date, right? MMDDYY, or is it date with time, or is a month is like in December, January, 1 or 2, right? Understand your data, interact with your data, understand it, build your visualization accordingly, communicate that process. Okay. This is another key pieces. A lot of the earlier part and volume and all of those, most systems can handle it, might not impact you tremendously, but the veracity of the data can really break you, right? Really break your visualization, in the sense that you're putting out this nice little visual out to your colleagues or peers or your executive decision makers, right? But how do you know if the data itself is correct, right? Your visualization is only as good as your data. So this is where interacting with the data. Earlier somebody was asking about the pivoting, right? Pivoting a data in a spreadsheet or doing SQL queries directly database. This is going to help you do all the Q&A that you need, right? The cost of bad data and bad information is really, like, the coronavirus case can be a classic example of how bad data is leading to imperfect decisions, right? But it's in a crisis mode. We are not built to capture this kind of a data system, right? So again, think very carefully about how this data is coming from, where this data is selected, where it's organized. Normally, when somebody presents me a report, a dashboard, this is the first question I ask before you get into the volume question or the batch, or how often the data is coming to you, what are the schedule. Like, the first thing I want to do is, where did you get this data from, right? Or did you download it from OpenNYC, or did somebody email it to you? The integrity of that, I want to feel confident that I can share this data with my stakeholders and say, okay, I feel confident about this data. This data came from so and so place, and this data is factual and is accurate, right? And that goes a long way, right? Otherwise, your visuals can be completely skewed, right? Precise, which simply means precise, accurate, and trusted. Make sure that before you start your visualization process, you interact with the data, you make sure that all of this is correct. The cleansing and the correcting and corruptions of data. A little bit quick tip here. Sometimes, right, you have 100,000 records. The threshold is 30% of the data is bad, right? You can live with it, right? Anything more than 30%, the whole data set is kind of not useful. Okay. And so, for example, you're doing population data or revenue data or income data on a city like New York, right? And you don't have income for like 30% of the population. All you can do is take the median from the remaining 70% of data and populate the median for the remaining 30%. Okay, so it doesn't skew the data too much. And when you do the visualization, explain to your audience that this data has been changed or skewed a little bit with this additional, with some correction that you did. Okay, and again, make sure that the email address is correct, and in the state value, the appropriate state is correct, in the date field, appropriate date column is correct, right? Just making sure the data itself is correct before you go into the visualization process. Again, this is a part of the analysis. You just talked about it, understand where it is coming from, the acceptable changes, 30% being the threshold. If there is no particular data, look at everything else, come up with the median and fill up what you have. And once you have that, all of that in place, which means that you understand the volume velocity, which is okay, which is a little bit of a lower risk level, because most tools can handle it now. The variety and the veracity of the data. Variety also, let's assume that most of them is in a tabular format. The veracity, that is, the data is clean and factual, and you're feeling confident. Now is the time to get into the analyzing phase, right? You're trying to query the data, you're trying to understand the number of counts, you're trying to make sure how big is this data set, how it is skewed, all of that, right? And that will put you in a good place where you can actually start visualizing. And this whole process is called analytics. Okay, this whole process of visualizing this information is called information analytics, right? And we're going to get to talk a little bit about operational analytics as well. How do you, information analytics, we normally deal with the population itself as a physical member of society, and operational analytics or operational reporting normally you do internally. in terms of what are your logs looks like, how many people logged into your system, or immediate visibility in terms of revenue and finance, right? And some continuous insight in terms of security that you want to look at. So operations in analytics is mostly internal. Information analytics is much more uh, upfront and outward looking. And three different types: the batch, interactive, and stream. The batch is what we seeing now in terms of, again, going back to the corona example, we are seeing data come up every 24 hours. Most of the public dashboards are available every 24 hours. And if you look at Johns Hopkins dashboard, it's mostly projecting. You can interact with it, right? You can select a state, you can select a city, and you can see how many cases, how many deaths, what is the scenario looks like. You can interact with your visual. Okay, that's an interactive stage. And the streaming part is not so much applicable to everybody because you have it in Facebook, you have it in LinkedIn. I mean, a lot of this IT companies use it. They want to look at real-time information. Flight booking is a good example where they use stream analytics with real-time flight status. Okay, but normally not so much applicable in a corporate environment unless you're working in finance. That summarizes it, right? That brings it down to the whole visualization process from a data perspective. Before we jump into the visualization itself, the process of just kickstarting a visual process, any questions so far?
While you're thinking about questions, I'm also going to start another poll. We'd like to hear from you about your current skill set with the data visualization tools. So take a moment to give us your answers about how comfortable you are with the current visualization tools that you're using. Great, so we're getting some folks that are just getting started and hopefully are finding some of this information valuable even before they get into the visualization tools so that they can see some of the issues that they might come up with, as well as some folks with experience, and we have some folks with mid-level experience. Excellent, thank you for participating.
All right, fantastic. So let's move right ahead, right? So let's look at this visual, right? This is a phenomenal visual environment, right? Very well annotated. It shows everything you need, right? It shows the progression in terms of the getting warmer. It has the hotter than, the average is right annotation. So before we get here, we're gonna go through this process of how do we build something like this, right? What kind of questions would you ask to get to a place where we are building this, right? It has all the data, all the questions related to data that is captured prior, what we talked about in the last 15 minutes or so, right? It has the date and time. Instead of month and date, it skipped all of it. Okay, they decided that we're going to only do it by year. So it is discrete. They put it in yearly buckets. So they averaged it per year and they looked at the yearly buckets. And then has nice annotation in terms of what this means, and also the source, right? That also it's come from NASA, so the veracity question is answered, right? Okay, this is not something that I made up yesterday evening. This comes from a trusted source, so the trust and accuracy, right? It comes with its own credibility that is coming from a decent place. You want to think about structuring your visuals this way, right? So it has the key elements. It has the right metric in place. It has the right annotation. It has the right marking. It has a great title. And it also shows you the source where this data comes from. Okay. A lot of times folks miss the source part, and then that leads to a lot of assumptions. And sometimes as you move up in the ladder in terms of the kind of people that you're presenting this to, this is something that folks want to know. Did you get it from a marketing team? Did you get it from a donors team? Did you get it from your fundraising team? Or did you get it from a finance? Where did you get this data from, right? That's something that people wanted to know. So how do we get here, right? The reason why we are visualizing this is essentially anytime you put your data on a visual, you are essentially telling a story, right? You're communicating a lot of pieces of information in a snapshot, right? That's what it's essentially doing. It's more than just numbers. It's just not saying like it's 80 degrees, 90 degrees, all of that. You're trying to communicate a pattern, right? During the analyzing phase or a spreadsheet or SQL, you're doing a lot of those number crunching. When you get into visualization, you're trying to tell a small story. It could be, you can debate whether the story is 10 minutes long or the story is like a quick 30-second. You're essentially communicating a story about that event, all right, in a really quick, simple visual, right? And the third question you want to ask is like, do you want to convince people and have action that is necessary, right? If you look back at this visual, it's alarming, right? The weather is, the climate, the temperature is going up steadily since the last 50 years or so. So again, right, this is again, you're trying to get an action from your audience, right? So there is two fundamental difference, right? You can either do the same thing, you can just present your data. It could be boring, right? It could be just cool. I could put some numbers, send all these numbers in an email, and people might forget it, right? Or you can communicate this as a visual, which could be a bit more warm, a bit more emotional, and a bit more subjective, right? And this is something, the story format, the visual format is easy for people to absorb. All right. So you want to really think about it. You really want to think about it. What is the story? When you do the analyzing phase, don't be so eager to pivot it, right? Don't be so eager to download Tableau or any of your favorite visualization. Let me load it, let me build it out, right? Think about it in terms of a screenplay. What does that look like? How does the audience absorb this information? Okay. And that becomes your story. Only 5% of the people remember statistics. The numbers normally go way above your head, and 63% of the people remember the story, right? They remember the visual. You do a good visual, that would be a good takeaway. Okay. The science of a story, again, I'm stating the obvious here. A lot of them engage your senses. It brings us closer in terms of everybody's looking at the same thing. Nobody's looking at different numbers, right? It's kind of bringing the data together to you emotionally, right? And then, that leads to action. And from from a very practical standpoint, once you start looking at your data, understand what kind of visual that you're building. There are three fundamental types of visualization. Okay, the exploratory visualization, the explanatory, and inspiring visualization. Right. The exploratory is what we just looked at, which is a single piece of data, a single piece of information, just to show the weather patterns or things of the nature. Explanatory is a bit more detailed. Probably you take that same bar, same visual, you wanted to show it by state, by country, by city, right? You really explain it, digging too deep into it. And this normally happens at an operational level, okay? And inspiring is that it might not be just one piece of information. You're having a series, you have 10 slides, like a TED talk, right? 10, 15 slides, you're going after a full story. You want to inspire somebody. In that case, you really want to map out, right? It's almost like writing a book. You really want to map out a story. Sometimes it takes me months to build that thing out, and you got to think about it from that perspective. All right. And three types of decisions are normally made from data: a discrete in the case of warm, in the case of the weather chart that you just recently saw, or operational. Okay. The operational data is mostly something that your finance team would look at, right? How do you keep the system going, right? There is a little bit more room to downplay the story aspect because they're looking at a little bit closer to the real information and the strategic, right? And most of you working with getting started with visualization, think about where your visual is playing in these three different buckets. Is it going to be discrete? Is it going to be operational? Or is it going to be strategic? All right. Discrete is like a very single data point. You're just looking at data set just from New York. Operational, you're looking at more consumed by internal subject matter expertise, something that you're building just for the finance team. They know exactly what they want to look at, right? And strategic, mostly you're dealing with your executive teams, right? And they want to look at the holistic picture. Don't just show me one piece of information, show me the whole thing. Let me see how it gets played out, right? And this is the process. Start with the question, what do you want to really look at? What kind of visual you want to build? What kind of data are we looking at, right? And then it goes into the gathering process, the ingestion and the collection process. Then it goes in the structuring. We talked about the dates and states and all of that stuff. Then that comes to the exploration phase. then eventually that builds to, we are in a place where we communicate it, or we can build visuals out of this data. Gathering data, right? Where it came from, the 5 V's that we talked about, right? Is data authentic? Do we have all the data that we need? Do we have by year? Do we have by month? All of that. All right. Think through it. We covered it already, but just a refresher from a different perspective. So approach it as it is. Before you, if you are building out a strategies visual, or if you're building out an operational visual, understand the process. Okay, formulate your point of view, understand what kind of data you're dealing with, and then you go into the structuring of the story phase. If you are just a single visual, this might not be so much applicable. But if you are building out a story, if you are building out a visualization that is strategic, that is going to be presented to an executive audience, start with the beginning. Think of it really like a story, right? Three pieces to it, right? When you start with introducing the data. Okay, start with introducing the data, start building context. Always assume that your audience might not know your data as much as you know. Okay, introduce what you're dealing with, get into that mode where you're explaining to people this is what you're dealing with, this is the kind of data. Build some context, build some business context, even with the people that you already know, right? Then the middle part of it, provide more explanatory reports, like this is the weather situation today, this was the weather previously, and eventually come up with options. Okay, you wanted to take step one or you want to take step two, and then finally present your preferred choice, right? Your point of view in terms of how this should play out, how this decision should play out, right? And this very much applicable in strategic visualization or strategic storyboarding. Right. Couple more slides here. We're almost at the tail end of it, and that leaves us a few minutes for questions. So really, right, really what we're trying to do is we're trying to communicate the technical problem, right? A lot of information that we are trying to present it to users in something they can understand, right? So the real question is that how can we transfer all this raw data that we capture from CSVs, text files, how do we bring that into charts and plots that we can the audience can understand, right? So think about in detail, right? Map each one of your data sets into a visual that you want to build out, right? That level of thinking helps make your visualization easier. And the second part of it is, does all of this thing you want to communicate has meaning, right? Are you picking the right visual? Are you picking pie chart instead of a bar chart, right? Play that in your mind. Sometimes I take a pen and piece of paper and just map it out and say like this visual might look good, might not look good. Then I might use a visual tool to just map it out real quick, see if it makes sense before I actually start the development phase. And eventually, did everything that I did so far add value, right? Was it effective? Know your goal goes without saying. Understand who your target audience is. Is it going to be one individual that is who's looking is in your finance department? Is your entire board, right? And what is the effect that you're trying to get out of it? What is the meaning that you're trying to communicate? So go through that process. Okay, understand your audience, know your goal, and ask these three fundamental questions, right? And earlier we talked about the 5 V's and building out this spreadsheet. Really build out that design requirement document in terms of it could be as simple as a spreadsheet, or sometimes we do very detailed out road mapping in terms of Word document, and all of this is clearly called out. But anything short of that, just make sure that at least this information is captured. Something that you can always go back to and say, this is what we talked about, this is where we are at right now. Some of the key things here: know your goal, use the right data, select suitable visualization. Some of you guys are already familiar with bar charts and plots and pie charts and dot plots. So understand your data, then that will help you match into a visualization, right? Design for aesthetics, use light use of colors, and then choose your effective medium and model. What does that mean? Are you going to put that as a visual as a web link? Are you sending this as a PowerPoint? Are you sending this as a as a moving image, or as it's sending as an image, understand, right, what people are consuming. So most of the time, right, I send a PPT, I send the link, as well as send the PDF, because most folks are looking at it from an iPhone or an iPad these days, right? So make sure that building is one part of it, then eventually you want to communicate, right? Check the results, understand how people are interacting with it. Are they able to understand it? Get feedback. And if it's not really impactful, probably you might want to rethink, this is not the right visual, right? You might want to go back and redo it. So it's not a one-stop process. It's a recursive, and it's a ongoing process in which how you improve it. And in terms of delivery mechanism, again, right, is it a one page, or is it text, or an email, or you're presenting it in live? And things matter based on how you do it. All right. And depending on this mode, you can decide whether you want to send PPT or a PDF. All right. And finally, these are some of the tools that's in the marketplace that we use. Right? The first one is IBM Watson, Power BI, or R is a bit more programmatic. Click View is used very much in the financial organization. Microsoft Azure has its own visualization tool. Python is been used heavily in a lot of organizations now. Tableau is used heavily for executive reporting, and TIPCO has a product which is not as popular as the rest, but they have a product called Spotfire, which is also very friendly for large data sets, right? And some tips here, which we already talked about. That's pretty much majority of it. And I have few appendix where I have extended this to include a lot of tips and processes and how to choose the right visual for the right set of data. We might not be able to cover all of that today, but I'm going to include that in the final deck, which you got sent out. That leaves us around 7 minutes for questions, if anybody has anything to talk about.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jay. Please feel free to chat your question, or you can also alternatively raise your hand, and I'll be happy to unmute you if you wanted to ask a question that way, if there's anything that you're interested to know more about, or if you have a specific question as to a project you're working on now in your organization. Let's give everyone a minute to think about anything they might want to ask. And Jay is also available offline, so feel free to connect with him through email. LinkedIn will be uploading this video and the presentation with contact information as well if you wanted to follow up with something more specific. I'm not seeing anyone with any specific questions or any chat or Q&A. So I think that is all. Thank you all very much for joining. And yes, I will post emails. Here's the email address. Again, that will be coming to everybody that has joined. Thank you all very much. Stay safe. Thank you, Jay. Good job.
All right. Thanks, Ania.